James Miller was the kind of neighbor who blended into the rhythm of Maplewood polite nods. Steady job, an ordinary man with an ordinary life. Claire Bennett was a young teacher whose kindness touched nearly everyone she met. The last person anyone expected to see lying lifeless in the town park. Emily Harper, a retired nurse, had spent years caring for others, never imagining her final moments would be twisted into a message of fear. And Ethan Thompson, a quiet accountant, had built his life on numbers and routines, never knowing he had been chosen as part of a pattern. Their names, once symbols of normalcy, became forever linked to a chilling truth in Maplewood. Crime did not hide in shadows, it unfolded in the open, daring the world to see. The town of Maplewood had always been the kind of place people drove through and thought about how peaceful it looked. Rows of tidy houses, white fences, children riding their bikes in circles on the street, and neighbors who waved at one another gave it the kind of charm usually found in magazines. People there believed in safety. They left their cars unlocked, let their children walk to school without a second thought, and trusted that life would continue at the same calm rhythm it always had. Nothing dark ever seemed to stain the surface of Maplewood. That illusion shattered on a warm summer morning, when the body of a young woman was discovered in the middle of the town's largest park. The discovery hit the community like a stone, thrown into still water, sending ripples of fear in every direction. The park was a gathering place, filled with jogging paths, picnic tables, and a playground that echoed with children's laughter. On that morning, a group of joggers were the first to notice something unusual near the far end of the open field. At first they thought it was someone sleeping in the grass. When they approached, the reality froze them where they stood. A woman lay on her back, motionless, her eyes closed, her clothes neat and undisturbed. There were no obvious signs of violence, no torn clothing, no scattered belongings. It was as though she had been placed there deliberately, carefully positioned. Under the open sky, where anyone could find her, word spread quickly. Police cars and flashing lights soon took over the park, pushing back the growing crowd of stunned onlookers. The woman was identified as a 27-year-old elementary school teacher who had lived in town for several years. She was well known, often seen riding her bike to work or carrying groceries home on the weekend. To most people, she was nothing but kind, the sort of neighbor who smiled in passing and volunteered at school events. The idea that someone like her could become the victim of such a chilling act didn't make sense. The strangeness of the crime unsettled even the seasoned investigators. This wasn't the kind of scene where evidence screamed its story.
Out there
Were no muddy footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest a struggle had ever taken place. It looked eerily calm, almost staged. Some officers whispered that whoever had done this wanted the body to be found. The open location felt intentional, a choice that carried a message they couldn't yet understand. The news rattled the small town's confidence in itself. People began locking their doors for the first time in years. Parents clutched their children's hands tighter at the park, and whispers filled the aisles of the grocery store. The victims' colleagues at the school were devastated, their grief, mixing with disbelief. A woman so full of life and promise had been cut down in a way that left no explanation, only questions. Why here? Why her? And why in such a public place? Investigators pieced together the final hours of her life. She had finished her school day, stayed behind 2 grade papers, and was last seen cycling home at dusk. No one recalled seeing her again, until her body was found the following morning. The timeline was thin, offering few places for answers to hide. Police urged the public to remain calm, but unease crept deeper into every household. The first chapter of this story was written not in shadows or secrecy, but in daylight, in a space meant for laughter and play. It was a crime committed not in hiding but in the open, leaving behind a haunting message that safety, even in the most ordinary places, could never be guaranteed. The town of Maplewood was no longer the same, and its residents knew that whatever had arrived in their midst had only just begun. The investigation into the teachers' death began with a mix of urgency and confusion. Detectives cordoned off the park and scoured every inch of grass, every bench, every trash can, hoping for a clue that would point them in the right direction. Yet the more carefully they searched, the less sense the scene seemed to make. Why the body had been left in plain sight, but there was almost nothing around it to explain how it had arrived there. No footprints trailed into the field, no fingerprints clung to nearby surfaces, no broken twigs or patches of disturbed earth suggested a struggle. It was as if the victim had simply appeared in the night, carried into place by invisible hands. The coroner's report brought the first real detail, though it only deepened the puzzle. The teacher had not suffered cuts, bruises, or broken bones. There were no signs she had fought for her life. Toxicology results revealed the presence of a powerful sedative in her system, one that could have rendered her completely unconscious within minutes. The official cause of death was suffocation. That discovery sent a chill through the investigators, because it suggested that whoever had done this had planned the attack carefully. It was not an act of sudden rage or chance. It was methodical, calm, and deliberate. Detectives turned their attention to her life, hoping to find a motive. They interviewed colleagues at the school who described her as a devoted teacher who loved her work and her students. Neighbors recalled seeing her, carrying books home, always with a polite nod or smile. Friends admitted she lived a quiet life, spending most of her free time reading, cooking, or visiting family in the nearby city. She wasn't dating anyone at the time, and no one could think of an enemy who might wish her harm. In fact, the more they searched, the more they painted a picture of someone who lived without controversy. That very absence of motive unsettled the police. Crimes in small towns often had roots in personal grievances, jealousy, secrets that spilled. Over here, nothing fit. Detectives considered the possibility of a stranger passing through, but even that theory had cracks. If a stranger had been responsible, why leave her body in the open? Why not try to cover their tracks, or at least move the scene somewhere hidden? The community grew restless as days turned into weeks without answers. Rumors spread in whispers. Some claimed the killer must have been someone close to her, hiding in plain sight, while others suggested a drifter had chosen the park at random. Parents began to worry not just about their children walking to school, but about anyone walking anywhere alone. The open fields and quiet streets that had once felt so welcoming now carried a sharp edge of unease. Detectives tried to piece together her final movements. She had been seen riding her bicycle home after school, but no one recalled spotting her after that. Security cameras from nearby intersections were checked, yet nothing unusual was captured. Her bicycle was later found leaning against the fence outside her house, suggesting she made it home that evening. What happened afterward was a blank space. Had she been lured out? Had someone waited for her? The lack of struggle made it seem. She had trusted whoever approached her. Theories piled up, but none settled into clarity. Each clue seemed to fade before it could form a path. The sedative suggested someone with knowledge and access, perhaps a medical background or training. The precise placement of the body pointed to control and confidence, yet without witnesses. Without physical evidence, the case felt like trying to build a puzzle without corners. For the people of Maplewood, the teacher's death became more than a tragedy. It became a constant reminder that the comfort they once relied on had been broken. Each empty sidewalk and quiet park bench whispered with possibility. Someone had committed a crime in the open without hesitation and had left no trace. Thought that such a person could still be walking among them, blending into daily life, made the small town feel larger and more dangerous than it ever had before. Weeks passed with the case of the teacher's death still unsolved. And just as the community began to hope the nightmare might fade, another body appeared. This time, it wasn't in the quiet calm of a park, but at the edge of a grocery store parking lot, a place lit by street lamps and busy with late-night shoppers. The victim was a middle-aged man, a local accountant known for his routine life and quiet habits. He had no known enemies, no history of conflict, nothing to suggest he would be a target. Yet there he was, found in the early morning hours by an employee arriving for work. His body rested near the entrance, positioned upright against a concrete pillar, almost as though he had been seated there before life was taken from him. Investigators rushed to the scene, already recognizing the haunting similarities. Like the teacher, the man showed no signs of struggle. His clothes were neat, his belongings intact. Toxicology tests later confirmed the same sedative had been used, and suffocation was again the cause of death. It was not just a second tragedy, it was a pattern. The killer had acted again, and this time the location was even more public, as if to taunt both the police and the town. The community's fear deepened into panic. The first murder had been shocking, but some had managed to convince themselves it was an isolated event, a strange and tragic anomaly. The second crime destroyed that fragile hope. People stopped walking, alone after dark. Families canceled evening outings. Curtains were drawn tighter, and alarm systems were purchased in record numbers. The streets of Maplewood no longer carried the sounds of laughter or casual conversation. They were filled instead with silence, suspicion, and unease. Detectives formed a task force, bringing in outside experts to analyze what they now believed to be the work of a serial offender. Profilers suggested the killer craved attention, choosing open spaces where discovery was inevitable. The absence of chaos at the scenes pointed to careful planning, perhaps even rehearsal. This was not the work of someone acting on impulse, but of an individual who took satisfaction in control. Surveillance. Cameras near the grocery store offered a glimmer of hope. Hours of footage were reviewed frame by frame. In the background of two different cameras, a blurry figure appeared, tall, wearing a cap pulled low over the face, and moving with deliberate calm. The same figure had been spotted near the park. On the night of the teacher's death, though at the time it had been dismissed as coincidence, now it was clear the presence was no accident. Even with this lead, frustration lingered. The footage was grainy, the details too vague to identify. Anyone? No license plates, no clear facial features, nothing that could transform suspicion into certainty. It was like chasing a ghost who had chosen to step just far enough into the light to be noticed, but not enough to be caught. The killer was sending a message, and the town understood it. No place was safe. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered another chilling detail. Both victims had been taken from their homes or daily routines without anyone noticing. The teacher had vanished after returning home from school, and the accountant had been last seen locking his office door. Neither showed evidence of being forced, suggesting they had either trusted the person who approached them or had been subdued so quickly that resistance was impossible. The sedative explained part of it, but the willingness to leave safety behind hinted at something more. By the end of the third week, Maplewood no longer felt like the same place. Fear clung to every corner store, every park bench, every streetlight flickering in the night. The killer had struck twice, each time leaving behind a silent, terrifying message. They were not hiding. They were not afraid. They wanted the entire town to see what they were capable of, and they were daring everyone to stop them. For the investigators, the sense of urgency became heavier with each passing day. For the people of Maplewood, the sense of dread only grew stronger. They wondered who would be next. The fragile grip of calm that Maplewood clung to after the second murder shattered completely when the third body was found. This time it was a retired nurse discovered at dawn on the sidewalk near a bus stop. The woman had left her home early to meet a friend for breakfast, but she never arrived. Instead, a passerby spotted her motionless figure resting unnaturally against a bench, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Just like the two victims before her, there were no signs of a struggle, no robbery, no disarray. The same sedative lingered in her system, and the cause of death was once again suffocation. By now, the pattern was undeniable, and the terror gripping the town was complete. 3 victims, all unrelated in age, occupation, or social circle, had been chosen. None of them had connections to each other, and yet their deaths were linked by eerie precision. The randomness was what frightened people most. The killer had a clear type or reason. Perhaps someone could predict who might be in danger. But with victims so different, anyone felt like a potential target. The placement of the bodies troubled investigators more than anything else. The park, the grocery store, and now a bus stop each, was an ordinary place woven into daily life. The killer seemed intent on taking the most familiar spaces and corrupting them into scenes of dread. It was not just about taking lives, but about sending a message. The ordinary was no longer safe. The fear grew sharper, more invasive, spreading through every routine. People avoided errands, skipped gatherings, and refused to walk alone, even in broad daylight. The sense of community that had once defined Maplewood was dissolving into paranoia. Investigators tried to find connections where none seemed to exist. They mapped the crime scenes onto a large town chart and made a chilling discovery. The three locations formed a rough triangle, each point marking a different side of Maplewood, all circling the town center. It was too precise to be coincidence. The killer was not striking at random, he was marking territory using the victims' bodies as symbols to draw a shape over the town itself. Detectives realized that the crimes were as much about geography as they were about people. Forensic teams were deployed with even greater focus. And this time they caught their first real break. On the retired nurse's clothing, they found tiny fibers clinging to the fabric. When tested, the fibers were traced to an uncommon upholstery material used primarily in older vans. The detail gave investigators something tangible to chase. Thin but promising thread in a case built on shadows. They cross-checked vehicle registrations across Maplewood and surrounding areas. Dozens of names appeared, but most were quickly eliminated. One stood out: a man who owned an aging delivery van with the exact upholstery in question. He was a lifelong resident of the town, known to most people by sight, if not by name. To neighbors, he was ordinary, blending into the rhythm of daily life without attracting suspicion. He worked as a delivery driver, often seen navigating familiar streets, waving at those who passed by. The realization that someone so visible, so woven into the fabric of Maplewood, could be behind the crimes unsettled everyone involved. If the fibers matched as strongly as the lab suggested, the killer had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. It explained how he could move unnoticed, how he could approach his victims without raising alarms. The task force prepared to move, carefully gathering enough evidence to make their case airtight. They knew they were closing in, but they also knew the killer might not stop until caught. The fear that another body could soon appear weighed heavily on them. Maplewood waited in silence, holding its breath, knowing the next move could either bring an arrest or another. Morning filled with flashing lights and grief. When police finally moved in on the delivery driver, the town of Maplewood held its breath. For weeks, suspicion had tightened around him. Few could believe that someone so ordinary was capable of orchestrating such calculated horrors. His white van was parked neatly outside his modest home when detectives arrived with a warrant. From the outside, the house looked like any other on the street, its porch light still glowing faintly in the early morning haze. Inside, however, investigators uncovered the grim truth that tied together the terror of the last months. The search of the van revealed syringes, bottles of sedatives, and strips of duct tape tucked into compartments behind the seats. The same rare upholstery fibers found on the nurse's clothing matched perfectly with the worn interior. Maps of Maplewood were discovered, each one carefully marked with circles and lines that corresponded to the crime scenes. In the man's garage, more unsettling evidence waited, notebooks filled with detailed observations of daily life in town. He had recorded the routines of neighbors, the times when streets grew quiet, and the places where people were most vulnerable. Each entry was written with chilling precision, documenting a mind obsessed with control and surveillance. The arrest was swift, and the driver offered little resistance. What shocked investigators most was not a violent outburst or denial, but the calm way he accepted the cuffs around his wrists, as though he had been expecting them all along. During questioning, he admitted to the crimes without hesitation. His reasoning was simple, though deeply unsettling. He wanted people to feel fear. He had chosen public spaces deliberately, staging each body where discovery was unavoidable. For him, the act was not just about taking lives, but about destroying the illusion of safety that the town had lived under for decades. He claimed his goal was to show that no place, no matter how ordinary, could ever truly be safe. The confession left detectives and residents alike stunned. The killer had never hidden. He had driven past them every day, delivered packages to their doors, and exchanged polite greetings in passing. That ordinariness was the mask that had allowed him to move without suspicion. He had blended into the very fabric of the town he sought to unravel. For Maplewood, the revelation was as painful as it was terrifying. Evil had not crept in from the outside. It had been growing quietly from within. As news of the arrest spread, relief mingled with sorrow. The killer's capture meant an end to the string of murders, but it did not erase the scars. The families of the victims were left to face the absence of loved ones, their lives forever altered. For many in the community, the fear did not vanish overnight. Parks, parking lots, and sidewalks still carried memories of flashing police lights and the weight of tragedy. Even with the danger removed, the sense of safety that had once defined Maplewood could not be restored so easily. In court, the driver showed no remorse, sat expressionless as evidence was laid out, as prosecutors described the deliberate planning and cold execution of each act. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought justice, but not closure. Closure was impossible in a story that had unraveled so openly. In front of everyone's eyes, the town of Maplewood learned a truth it would never forget. The most terrifying crimes are not always hidden in dark alleys or remote places. Sometimes they are committed in full view, daring others to witness them. Safety had always felt like a promise in Maplewood, but the murders revealed it was only ever a fragile illusion. In the end, what haunted the town most was not the darkness of the crimes themselves, but the realization that they had been carried out in the open. Disguised by the face of normal life,